Welcome to A Stranger, a Suitcase and a Story. I'm Anton van Ben. This is a podcast about starting over. It is about what it takes to leave the familiar behind and the courage it takes to begin again in a land that isn't yet home. Together with my co-host Ben Liebenberg, we explore the untold stories of migration. Not just where people went, but why they left, what they held on to, and what they've had to let go. Each episode, we sit down with someone who's made that leap. Someone who's left behind not just places, but languages, careers, communities, and sometimes even parts of themselves. They share what called them forward, what nearly held them back, and what they've come to understand about identity, belonging, and starting again. Produced in partnership with Southern Crossings, a community for South Africans forging new lives in Australia, this podcast is a place to feel seen, heard, and understood. Because this isn't just about visas or paperwork. It's about identity, loss, hope, and the quiet strength it takes to rebuild a life piece by piece. So wherever you are on your journey, arriving, settling, or still thinking about it, welcome. This is where stories connect us all.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This information to customers travelling on the Land Airways flight LA 800 question 741 to Street 21 service to Auckland and Santiago. If you find a
Well, hello Ben, and welcome to our final episode of 2025. Can you imagine?
Yeah, no, hard to imagine that we've come this far. It's been a year already. It's a bit always like that, eh? When you reflect the end of the year, you can't believe how much has happened and actually how short the year has been at the same time. So, yeah, very happy to be here.
That's right, Ben. They say as you get older, the years go past faster. So a little bit faster for me than you, but but yes, it's quite amazing. This is episode 19 of the first season, and I had a quick look, and our first episode that we dropped down was March 17 of this year. So I think very, very happy that we got almost to 20, so really quite keen to do our last episode for the year.
Yeah, I think if we said it a few times, before we started, and somebody said you're going to do 20 episodes and still be running at the end of the year, I think there would have been big odds against us, including ourselves.
I think so. I think we were probably not thinking. I certainly didn't think that we'd be able to do that, and so I think this is not the time to give ourselves a pat on the back. I think it's more reflecting to say, but we've had these most amazing and wonderful guests that have come on, and Ben, the take-up rate of if we approach somebody or talk to somebody, most often they say yes, and as soon as we talk to them about the podcast and you say, well, it's a stranger, a suitcase, and a story, other than they love the name, they say, and then they immediately start talking about this story, which is really just, I think, the whole point of what we were trying to do here in the first place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we started it. I think for a few reasons, I think, like I said it before, but like any good thing, it started over a glass of red wine, and we thought, hey, it would have been good if we had this when we started. And the feedback that we've got so far is that, yes, it is helpful, and we've had good feedback from people saying, gee, it would have been good, to had it a few years ago when they came over, people who's been here for a few years. So if it's helped one or two people, I think we've had a good year and we've had a success, because that's what we said, how we're going to rate ourselves. If we can be of help to somebody, then, yeah, that's what the pod is all about.
Yeah, I think so, and you're being very humble about it, but the feedback that we got was really excellent. We I think, exceeded certainly our expectation, because most often people were saying, where were you? You know, when we came across, we would love to know this, or say, well, we've got this wonderful story, and I didn't know that everybody else had with the same problem, and so on and so on. And so, but I think that, you know, I'd love to get into the rest of the podcast. I think what we're going to try and do is to recap a little bit of the past year. We'd love to mention everybody that were on the podcast, so that's going to be an attempt today. Tell a little bit of a story about what we've heard, but I think that, you know, so we'll go through that. But I think, well, Ben, we need to start at Bondi Beach. It is just the most horrific attack that has happened there, and I think for us living in Australia, you know, many of the times, almost everybody talked about how safe Australia is and how nice it is to be here, and so on. And then something like this happens that it just shakes you to your core to say, you know, often you think there's just nowhere safe in the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me it resonates because, well, it definitely does, but just generally. But I think we had our episode with Andrew just before this happened.
Yeah.
And I was actually reflecting on his story quite a bit, you know, with his mum and dad and the journey they've had to South Africa, but then also over here to Australia. And I was thinking about him quite a bit over the last few weeks since it's happened. You know, I was driving to work and I'm thinking, how would we feel if we were in a park somewhere, you know, just doing a boerewors, and some guys might have a Springbok jersey on, some might not, and whatever, but it's just a group of South Africans and somebody just came and that happened to us, and how would you feel, you know? And that pulled it home to me, and the fact that Andrew was on our pod as well, it really pulled it home to me. And I think you normally hear the story, but this time, I don't know why, but for some other reason, I found it to be quite personal this time around.
Mm-hmm. You did, and you're right. I mean, that's a beautiful analogy in the sense that if you want to visualize, which you can't, but if you, as best as you can, visualize how terrible it was, how hard it was, how frightening it was for people before and then after, right? And so, and I think that that's a beautiful analogy for that, because then you can put yourself and try and put yourself into the position. But I think that, you know, for us here in Australia, I think it's just a question of bringing some truths home, that life is precious, and that you know, we really grateful for what we have, and when something like this happens, reach out and say, you know, we're with you. And that's about I think what one can do at this point.
Yep. No, absolutely.
Yeah. So, you know, as I said, we want to talk a little bit about the story. And so you mentioned that Andrew was one of our guests. And so when we put together our kind of synopsis of what happened to the year, the story around conscience, courage, and the work that we do was kind of explained a little bit by Andrew, by Mark, and by Margaret. And so, you know, Mark's story is a thread of conscience running through a turbulent history. As a student in 1980, he joins protests against apartheid, organizes walks out, and experiences the fearful adrenaline of doing something that feels dangerous but necessary. He said, of course you were scared. You'd not be human not to feel that, but you had to be brave because it wasn't important to be brave. So when conscription comes, Mark chooses to become a conscious objector and leaves for the UK, and then later immigrates to Australia. It's not a glamorous exile, it's an awkward, humbling reset. He must requalify in law, prove himself in a new firm, and explain his accent again and again. Over the years, he became a senior partner at Ashurst, advising on major deals and taking on leadership roles in the arts and philanthropy. The line that sticks with us, Ben, was, and later with Andrew as well, that it isn't about the CV. It's about how he talks about identity. What really upset Mark is when people call themselves ex-South African. I'm sure you can remember that. He argues that you can't shed your birthplace like an old coat. He prefers to call himself a South African who now happens to be an Australian as well. And so when Andrew, coming to Andrew, when he hears that and immediately recognized something similar he felt all his life. And as you mentioned, he was a child of a Holocaust survivors. He has carried his parents' courage and their silence in equal measure. And his father, having lost his family in Europe, chooses to start afresh in South Africa. Not talk about what was done to them. And Andrew and his brother grew up like the kids next door, but with an unspoken awareness that the adults in the house have seen things they cannot imagine. When the offer comes to lead a struggling Australian company as a 20-minute window in which he decides, that was such a funny part. He says, he moves across the world at speed and spends years trying to rescue a business that others have already written off. He frames the choice in terms of his parents' example. Courage, he says, is in his DNA. When there's a decision to be made, you must be brave. He agrees with Mark. You never give up your roots. Those are your roots. That's where you're from. That's what formed you. So for him, migration doesn't mean switching side. It means carrying your history forward. And the third kind of person in this conscience, courage, and the work that we do was Margaret. And her story was a little bit different, but a quiet form of leadership into our season. But hers was rooted in generosity, mentorship, and the long game of inclusion. And she was born and raised in Pinetown and near close to Durban. And she arrives in Australia through Deloitte with a professional security. I mean, you remember she was saying it was so easy to come in. But no illusions about what it meant to start again without a family close by. What she carries with her is not a fear or resentment, but a deep belief in human rights, opportunity, and the responsibility to open doors for others. As South Africa's first female audit partner and later a trailblazer with Deloitte Australia, she became a builder of networks, not just for herself. And here comes an unbelievable piece of statistic when we asked her, but for thousands of others. Over 3 decades, she helps bring close to 8,000 South Africans to Australia for those who wanted to come, not by promising ease, but by offering honesty, community, and support. Her leadership is visible in numbers, 5 female partners when she arrived in Australia, and now she reckons it's over 400. But her real legacy lives in the quieter spaces, brides that become surrogate families, mentors who change trajectories, and a conviction that belonging is something you actively create, not something you wait for. So these were some really good stories and really very deep stories that we had been during the season, right?
Yeah. It's also, just listening to you, it's also funny how we think differently and remember things differently, So I think back of the episode with Mark and being a sports fan, the one thing that stands out for me is the story about Muhammad Ali when he brought him over.
That's right.
So that's the thing that sticks in my mind, and and obviously with Andrew, just a story with his parents. You could have made a whole podcast just about his parent stories. That was for me unbelievable, and I suppose again, it's almost like a fairy tale. You can't think, imagine the unimaginable. And then the thing about Margaret that I remember is just, she is explaining her dad and her life with her father, and then you just see her in her father, everything she does, how she brings people together, how she's like that coordinator and get everybody together for the bride and, pull people together. So it's just, interesting how our brains remember stuff.
Well, and that's what I think makes it so interesting, because there's so many deep and different stories, and it's so worth listening to them. I think I said to somebody, do I ever go back and go listen to every episode? And the answer is yes, I do. I often on a Sunday morning, Leanne and I would sit and I would listen to the latest episode, and because even if you're sitting here listening to it, you don't hear everything, right? Because you're focusing and you're concentrating. But, going back a little bit to the beginning, so let's rewind a little bit about how we got here. So we've been swapping stories about, long before the podcast arose. I mean, I knew you long before then. And we both left South Africa at different times and for different reasons. But so many of our experiences were the same. So comparing notes along the way, deciding to go, and finally, when it feels like home, we realized there were so many other similar stories. I mean, that's what we talked about. So just saying, well, if we have these stories, what are the others sound like? So stories that could, and then we thought about stories that could help others facing similar challenges. Every time we met another migrant, as we did, I think it was that one night that we were having a braai, as you said, and with a couple of wines, and there were a few other people similar to us there, and the stories just came out, and we heard most amazing things. And you were the protagonist, Ben, and that said, no, we need to do something about this. And then we said, if only someone had told me about this before I came. So, so I think for me, I put it simply in our first recordings, we'd love to hear other people's stories. Everyone has a fantastic story. Some, a lot of drama, others much easier. I mean, and then, of course, it happened. The accountant who uprooted his family after a robbery, the lawyer refused to serve an unjust system, or the kid who felt a stranger in his own country. You remember that? We'll talk about that in a moment. Long before the visas were even issued, each of them carried something worth hearing, and this is how the podcast was born. I think for you, Ben, the starting point was more practical. I wish somebody told me that story before I came. Coming over here was hard, but you can learn so much from these stories and what to do, and also know what not to do. So we both agreed migration is hard. People do it every day. They sell houses, they pack up memories, they learn new bus routes for those who take a bus and send their kids to unfamiliar schools. They don't think of themselves as heroes.
No,
but
definitely.
when
So the one thing I think for me as well, you're right. It was a practical thing of, what soap to buy and what grocery store to go to and how do you buy a car and open a bank account and all that stuff. So yes, there's practical sense to it. But the other side of it is also, I often I often tell the story when we were in the army and, we were on a 20K run with full webbing and your rifle on a Friday afternoon and it's raining. I was in Heidelberg running around the hills there. And you're really, really doing it tough. And you look around, and there's a guy weighing twice as much and being half your height, and you think how tough he does it. Somehow you feel better. I don't know why, but I think it's something about human nature that you find if you're not alone, and other people does it tough as well. And you hear all these people that come over here, and they all find it to extent tough in certain things, and you're not alone in it. That makes the journey a little bit easier, and it makes it better for people to understand that if I'm going through it, just it's okay. Everybody goes through it.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And then, so everybody's lives start to sound like the kind of stories that normally only makes it into books, right? Because you think, did it really happen? And I think that was the reason. For a stranger, a suitcase, and a story. So the stranger is the person who looks like they fit in but doesn't, who sounds a little bit different and who doesn't quite yet know what small talk is supposed to sound like in a new culture. We heard this time and time again, right? The suitcase was literal and invisible. That was the bag that holds photos or a handful of favorite spices or maybe your mom's recipe book, and definitely most often your Springbok supporters jersey that came from, for some of us, 1995, right? It's a lifetime of memories, the carefree childhood, the people who you grew up with, our multicultural roots, and a country that seemed to hold so much promise. And I remember saying, what you can't leave behind tells you who you are. I remember saying that because it was, for me, it was like that, whatever I could bring with me, a lot of that defined it. And I talked about my camera equipment and that sort of thing. I could never like sell that, and I could sell a house, but not my cameras. Well, so the story is what we tell ourselves and others, how we make sense of it all. So Ben, it was like, two men, four identities. I grew up in Randburg, was conscripted in the Defence Force, and ended up in a unit that changes how I see South Africa. Later, I built a career in industrial psychology and HR, and spending years across other regions. And that's what we said in our first story. It was also a point for me, if you remember, that the reason why I'm here today is probably the highlight of my year for 2025, if you ask that question. Because I said in that first podcast, the reason why we came in the first place is because, there could have been other, political issues or maybe other issues, but we sent Anton, our son, to Australia to come and study. He got a job here, and then we realized, wow, there's only one kid, and what happens if he gets married, and what happens if he gets a child, and then we're sitting somewhere far away, because wherever you live, you'd be far away from Australia, and so we decided to come, and then this year our grandson gets born, and so that's my highlight.
Absolutely.
And that's it just vindicated everything, every sacrifice, mentally, physically, financially, to be here, because in the end, family is everything, at least from my perspective, certainly.
Yeah, it's a great year. I think that's something to be proud of, and as you say, it's just that vindication makes it worthwhile.
Yeah. Your part was a little bit different, and that, your childhood in Paul was more stable. Well, not more stable. Same school, sport, conscription, and the family rhythms of town and community. But you made some early moves between South African cities, and then started going overseas to play rugby. And you had quite a bit of talk about that, the interesting thing with your first PGA that you had. And I think the comment that you made is that if you were playing rugby today, you'd be a multimillionaire. But no, you're not. No, you're not. No, you're just like an ordinary person. There you go. So
Yep.
it was almost like a practice for migration for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was, and even more so, because, you can probably say it's still the same today with me, but, just a different language was a barrier and was a difficulty as well.
Yeah.
Living in French and living in German, and, that was a challenge in itself. But as you say, these things are not destinations. They're all part of the journey, and that's what makes a journey worthwhile, is experiencing all of this stuff.
Yeah, and I think that what I remember in your part was that you and Louise came across, and you said, well, just maybe just 2 years, and there you are.
Yeah,
You never left.
True.
That's right.
But it's the same as you.
Yeah.
Same as you. We came over before we had kids, so I think that's the thing that changed it for us when our kids were born, and well,
That's right.
It's
You
not like
said we've got 2 Aussies and 2 South Africans in the house. Those were the
Yeah. Yeah. So, in any case, it's one of those decisions that we've never really consciously made, but I think we decided, and again, there's no wrong or right, but we decided, we feel that we're giving our kids the best opportunity by staying in Australia.
Yeah, and the one lasting thing that you said, which was quite profound, is this: you said that everybody got their own things going on in their lives. It just becomes much more visible when you immigrate, because it becomes more profound, and because of the challenges that you have.
True.
Wow. So migration doesn't invent problems; it magnifies them. That's what happens. So I think that by the time we were then ready, after our first 2 episodes, when the guest arrives, we're not just asking them, why did you leave? That was a small question. We were listening to other people's suitcases and what were in there and their stories and all that sort of stuff. And I think it was a good idea for us to even though, I mean, to be honest, it felt a little bit awkward talking about ourselves for 2 episodes, but I think it was a good idea. It kind of gave us a little bit of exercise of how this would happen, right?
Well, it also gives you a feeling of how it is to reflect a bit, because as you say, we don't do it every day, and we find it on the pod quite a few times, that people come on and then they start talking about themselves, and they really for the first time reflect on things and what happened and where they are, and it can become quite emotional because you bring up all these things that you didn't think is there, but they're there.
Yeah, they are. And so talking about those things, then, because one of the themes that came through was almost like the leap, making that jump, and why did you decide to leave? And so a couple of, of our guests talked about that specifically, and they had particular stories. You remember Donovan's decision was tied to his childhood, but not in the way that you might expect. He looks back at growing up in a small town South Africa with real affection, playing outside, running around barefoot, the freedom to roam without constant fear. It was precisely because he loves that version of South Africa that he decided to go. At some point he realizes he can't offer the same street-running, tree-climbing childhood to his own kids anymore, and he's invested 16 years of his life in one firm, working up from articles to partner, and then he walks away, so that his boys can ride bikes in the streets. So that was his decision. Nicole and Marolee, you might remember, a young couple, very adventurous, came on the same decision from another angle. They have had a great life in Cape Town, careers they enjoy, and an apartment on a beach road with an ocean view, family close by, everything that's supposed to mean you've made it. They don't leave because home is unbearable. They leave because they're adventurous. Moving to Sydney starts as a 2-year experiment. They'll try it, see how it goes, and come back if it doesn't feel right. Years later, they're still there. The experiment has quietly turned into a new life. Their story is useful counterweight to the narrative that you only emigrate if you're fleeing disaster. And I think that was important, right? So sometimes you leave something good to see if there's another version of good somewhere else. And so we found that from them. Francois experiences the pattern in stages. First as a child when his parents separate and he moves from Pretoria to Johannesburg. The geography shifts with social networks reset, and he discovers what it means to be the new kid long before he leaves the country. Later at Stellenbosch, the resident's life becomes a training ground for community building. When he eventually emigrates, he's already rehearsed the act of starting again twice. Munro, you might remember him very well, grows up in Houghton, literally next door to Nelson Mandela, he said. His childhood bubble is safe and comfortable. A politically active father, a mother who has tea with Madiba, a street that feels like a village. And he remembers it as secure and almost sheltered, and the decision to leave comes much later, after a particular event that shatters the sense of his safety. I think, he talked about how he was hijacked. And when he eventually moved to Australia, it's partly an attempt to recreate that earlier feeling of being able to exhale. And Ryan was raised in a mine near Roodepoort by his grandparents and a mother. He did not meet his father until his 20s. He grew up with love and discipline. He excels in sport and school and leadership roles. Later, when he talks about moving to Australia with his wife, he frames it as a calling rather than just a career move. He talks about feeling blessed and wanting the blessing somewhere else as well. For him, the leap is not about safety or opportunity. It's about purpose. And in these stories of the why of leaving is never just one thing. It's many: crime and opportunity, adventure, fatigue, children, careers, push and pull. Each decision is different. But they all land in the same way. At an airport, bags in a trolley, adrenaline buzzing, kids half asleep, adults wondering quietly, what have we done?
Yeah.
That usually happens, right?
It was interesting, though. I'm just thinking back of the names you just said, some of them come here, and I remember distinctly, and I can't remember exactly who it was, but I remember a few of them saying they came here and they just felt at home, and it felt like home straight away. And it was like a week later and they were just right in it and no problem and assimilated and that's it. And other people saying, oh, took me a long time, and the 2-year mark always comes up for a lot of people, but other people say it's probably 6 to 7 years before they really started feeling comfortable and home. So it's interesting that we always talk about the similarities, but also the differences when we do a pod and speak to people. And that's one of the things that I found was probably the most different or diverse between what people say is how long it took them to really adjust and assimilate into the culture and into society.
So, Ben, that's a wonderful segue. You know, you talked about when it finally feels like home, and so we have a couple of those that some took long, others arrive here and said, well, you know, I feel like I'm home. So it's like Kevin's story that captures that firstly the delay. He loses his father young, leaves his mother's house around 11 or 12, and is raised by his grandparents, who are already close to retirement. Independence is forced on him early, but so is a kind of displacement. He describes spending years feeling like a stranger in his own country. You remember that, right? In the sense of not fitting.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, not fitting doesn't start at the borders, it starts at home. Later, when he moves to Australia, the odd thing is that he begins to feel more at home, not less. The shift is not instant. There's the usual hassles, paperwork, money, work, but, you know, underneath something clicks. After many years of feeling out of place, he talks about a moment when he realizes he's finally relaxed, finally not scanning for danger, finally not performing. The title of his episode, When It Finally Feels Like Home, becomes a kind of a chapter heading for the season. It reminds us all that home is not just a place, it's a feeling of ease. Well, John holds 3 layers of home at once. His grandparents arrived in South Africa from Canton in the 1920s with whatever they could carry at the time, and the expectation that they'd work in the mines instead. They start a small general dealership selling anything that they could to survive. His parents and grandparents have little formal education, but a strong entrepreneurial instinct, so he grows up inside shops, learning how to read people, how to haggle, how to stretch a rand. He's a South African Chinese born into a country that doesn't know quite what to do with him. That's what he said, right? Later, when he moves to Australia and starts helping newer migrants navigate the system, he becomes a kind of a bridge across 3 worlds: Chinese ancestry, South African upbringing, Australian present. He talks about giving a no-holds-barred advice so that others don't repeat the mistakes. Home for him isn't a single flag. It's the ability to stand in the doorway and wave people through. And Kavir childhood is his own
just
mini...
before we go to, so I think that episode with John for me personally was absolutely fascinating, because I think a lot of the others I kind of like preempted. Some of them are surprises, but you could follow the story. But with John, I just learned so much from him, you know, just from how he grew up and what he had to go through in Port Elizabeth growing up there. But the funny thing that stuck in my mind is a story that he told when he said to us, he came to Sydney, and when he landed in Sydney for the first time, he walked around and he said, gee, so this is what it feels like not to be a minority.
Yeah.
It was just very funny, but yeah, very good episode. Yeah, great episode.
It was. And Kavir, his childhood is like his own mini United Nations, because he was Hindu at home, Jewish at the primary school, Catholic at high school, and he is as comfortable singing Hebrew songs as he's attending Mass or lighting incense. When he recalls being one of the Indian children admitted to a Jewish school when apartheid was still a thing, he does it with a matter-of-fact gratitude. For him, this was just what school was. He laughs about participating fully in everything: festivals, rituals, rugby, and only later realizes how unusual that mix was, right? He eventually moves with his family to the US and then to Australia, qualifying as a lawyer, building sown illegal and arguing cases in high courts. The patchwork of his youth becomes a acquired asset. He knows how to talk to different kind of people. And scattered through the season are smaller moments of belonging, expat rugby clubs that become surrogate families, church communities that open up practical and emotional support, WhatsApp groups that functions as lifelines, the first time a local pronounces your name correctly without help. Over and over, the same pattern emerges. People think belonging will come when external conditions line up. The right job, the right house, the right visa. It usually arrives in a much smaller moment. A neighbor who remembers your kids' names, a colleague who invites you to something that isn't work. And the day you stop comparing every street to the one you left and start noticing the tree in front of your own window.
Very
Right?
clear.
Yeah. So the next sort of theme that came up was the past in the suitcase. And so there were two particular people that we talked to, and it was Tanya and Grant. So, if the earlier episode was about logistics of moving, the middle of the season dives into what people bring with them that no customs form can see. So for Tanya, that was invisible luggage that was so heavy. She grew up in Durban in a family marked by tragedy and silence. A devastating event happens in her youth and nobody knows how to talk about it. And the pain is real, but so is the denial also. She learns quickly that some subjects are simply not raised at the dinner table. So she emigrates to the US, and there's all the usual work of starting again, jobs, visa, raising a son, but the old story comes with her. Years down the line, she decides that she cannot keep carrying that in silence, and she writes the secrets we keep, spilling the beans. She says in the podcast, our family tragedy has followed me. It made me realize that telling the truth, being honest, is critically important. You can't outrun your past. And she jokes gently about how much she brought with her physically. I didn't pack a suitcase, I packed a trunk. My childhood shaped the woman that I am today. I went through a lot. And it is all there in the book for those inclined to read it. Immigration doesn't dissolve unresolved stories. That was the point, Ben. It often forces them closer to the surface. So after the book comes out, people approach her, readers who say they recognize it in themselves. That happened to me as well, they tell her. If that's all that comes from writing, she says, that's enough. It's almost like our podcast, right? If we can help one person with their migration, that's enough, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the idea, and that's where we started, and we're still there.
So Grant, on the other hand, brings a different kind of history, but a similar gravity, right? As a boy in East London, he's mauled by a dog and left with physical, emotional scars. As a 19-year-old, he's driving the car in an accident that kills his father. Later, he suffers a deep personal betrayal that shakes his trust and relationship. Grant talks about endurance, the mental muscle needed to keep going. He has found a strange companionship between long-course triathlons and trauma, both demand and willingness to hurt for a long time without quitting. He describes migration as one of the most challenging chapters of his life, right alongside the accident and the attack. But pulls the thread together is a simple sentence. It's about having the mental fortitude to say, it's me, I'm in it, it's what happened, and now I'll take a step forward. So he tells a short, startling story about driving one day. I don't know if you remember that, Ben. I'm sure you do. After his father's death, thinking he sees a dead animal in the road and weeping uncontrollably for an hour. Grief has its own timeline, and it does not care how you change countries. Eventually, he writes a book, Yourself or Someone Like You, and he finds that writing about his life through the pain leaves him lighter for doing it. The act of setting it down on paper is a step forward for him.
Yeah, I do want to pause quickly on that episode because, as you know, Anton, that night we just built a braai, an old traditional braai, brick braai at my place, and I had a few friends over and we're going to see if it actually works, and like you do, and it was a bit chaotic at my place, to say the least, with people walking around and in and out. And normally we just do the pod and we tell the stories, and it works. And then Grant came up and he just blew me away with his story, to the point where I always felt, I didn't have much to say, because it really, really, I really felt that he has so much that he's gone through. His story of resilience was just absolutely amazing. And and I almost wish afterwards, and I said it to him afterwards myself, I wish I was in a different space, with, with less movement and less people around me, that I could just sit there and take it in more. But I did listen, as you say, afterwards to our episode again, and it was thanks to him.
Yeah, I could tell, Ben. I could tell that of all the episodes, it's the one that moved you the most. And it is. I mean, you sit there and you listen to Grant, who clearly, I think the thing that impressed me, or was the most amazing thing for me, the courage that he had, and where he took full ownership for who he was, what happened to him, and how he's going to deal with that. And that was, I think, the key, right? If anything, there's a story for, we talked about, going in denial and being the victim and all that sort of stuff. And Grant was the opposite of that. Such a courageous person with his pomegranate color shirt.
Talking about owning it, there's an example of somebody who stands up. So well done to him. Great episode.
So through Tanya's and Grant's stories, we realize that migration sometimes gives one the distance needed to finally open the trunk. And I think that's what it does, right? So it eventually forces you to do that. Other times it strips away distractions and makes what you have tried to outrun impossible to ignore. Either way, the message is clear. What's in the suitcase comes with you. You can't hide from who you are and what's happened to you. There were some other kind of interesting, let's call them leadership stories around what we had. Pierre, who grew up in Durban with his father, who's an accountant, and a mother who teaches. He follows the expected route into chartered accountancy, only to discover over time that he's more drawn to people, talent, and culture than balance sheets. So his career eventually stretches across several continents and countries such as Canada, US, Europe, and the Middle East, Asia Pacific. And when he talks about his 20s, he describes them as a time of trying things, learning, and not being overly concerned about a linear path. It's another form of courage, allowing yourself to experiment while you're still forming your professional identity. Ben, you were kind of quite similar in that sense, that you went out to all sorts of different places to try and, test things out and see how that's going to go, right?
Yeah. Some of them forced as well, So I did a financial degree in university as well, but I think I lasted about 2 weeks. Can you imagine me doing your tax? So, but, that's, I think, again, the lesson there is not, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey and how we learn about ourselves as we grow older. We're still learning.
Yeah. Yeah, and you remember that Ryan's leadership was more spiritual, right? He was blessed to
Very
be,
much so.
Blessed to be a blessing. Framing migration moves the conversation away from personal gains towards responsibility. He said that if life has given you opportunities, the question becomes, what do you do with them? He draws on the discipline and teamwork of years in sport and applies them to his work and family in Australia. John's leadership was informal but no less significant, having watched his grandparents and parents navigate business without safety net of formal education. He knows how easy it is for new migrants to make costly mistakes. In Australia, he turns that experience into kind of a mentorship, frank, sometimes blunt advice for people just arriving so they don't get taken advantage of in the way he once did. So woven together, these stories forms a picture of migration, not just as an escape or opportunity, but as a test of conscience. What do you do when the rules of the game change? What do you carry forward? What do you lay down? And who benefits from the life you build? So Ben, in summary, let's say thank you to them. By the end of 18 episodes in our season 1, we have heard stories of courage, of struggle, adventure, sacrifice, and opportunity, each unique in its own way, with which we can identify. There is so much we have in common. Ben and I thank each one of our guests for being willing to share these stories, and in doing so, helping us to understand just what it takes to make the decision to leave your home, your people, and what has made the person you are today. So for Nicole and Marilee, who left the seaside life in Cape Town, not because it was bad, but because they were willing to test whether the world had another chapter in them. Donovan, who walked away from a long-standing career so his children could ride bikes in the street without fear. Kevin, who spent years feeling like a stranger in his own country before finally exhaling somewhere else. Fransha, who showed up what it looks like to start again more than once. First from Pretoria to Johannesburg, and then to residence life, and then across the borders. John, whose grandparents arrived with what they could carry, and who now helps other migrants pack smarter emotionally and practically. Ryan, who sees migration not only as a blessing received, but as a blessing to be given. Pierre, who reminds our younger listeners that your 20s, you are allowed to be laboratory, and that the path into meaningful work is often not straight. Munro, who grew up next door to Mandela and later had to find a new bubble of safety halfway around the world. Mark, who walked out of propaganda meetings and refused conscription, who says you are always still South African even if you are now Australian. Tanya, who opened a trunk of family secrets, wrote them down, and in doing so helped other people to feel less alone. And Kabir, whose multi-faith, multicultural childhood made it look entirely normal to belong everywhere at once. And Andrew, who carried Holocaust inheritance into corporate boardrooms and insisted that roots are not discardable. Grant, who sat in his studio and calmly mapped out a life of trauma, movement, and stubborn forward motion, showing that sometimes courage looks like simply taking the next step. And lastly, Margaret, whose story reminds us that migration is not only about what you leave behind, but about what you choose to give forward. Through generously mentorship and lifelong commitment to inclusion, she's helped thousands of others find their footing in a new country, proving that leadership doesn't always announce itself loudly, but it often measured in lives changed quietly over time. And Ben, finally, we must thank all the many invisible people behind each story: spouses, children, grandparents, friends, siblings, those whose lives have irrevocably changed when the tickets were booked, right? These 18 conversations are a record of how ordinary people make extraordinary decisions and how they live them. Ben and I began these podcasts with a simple hope that someone listening, someone thinking about a move, might feel a little less alone. That someone already in a new country struggling quietly might say, okay, it's not just me. By the end of the season, this hope feels grounded, Ben. The stranger is still a stranger, but they know there are others. The suitcase is still heavy, but some people have found ways to open it, and the stories once told no longer belong only to the people who lived them. They sit in the ears of listeners on late-night drives, early morning walks, and quiet Sundays, whispering the same thing. You're not alone, and you're not the only one.
Yep. No, well said and well summed up. Thank you.
I got emotional there for a while.
Fantastic, because it's this. I just want to echo what you said. The quality of the people we've had on our show, we've just been so lucky to have them all. It's we got to know a few of them afterwards, been a few events with some of them, and yeah, they're really, really good people, and we're really fortunate that they were prepared to share their story with them, and we're very thankful for that. Look, on a personal note, at the end of the year, I just want to say thank you to you as well. I mean, for those listening to our show, I'm gonna admit it and say it here today. Anton does most of the work. In fact, he does all all the work.
Nice.
And no, I do want to acknowledge that, because he works extremely hard at our pod, and he does a lot of things behind the scenes. He does a lot of the organization, speaking to the guests, preparing our pod. And look, and I sincerely want to thank you for that. I think my best memory, or the best thing that I took from you out of this year, is your analogy around the two stones. I thought that was brilliant, and I reflected on it a lot as well, because I don't know, for some reason, as human beings, we sometimes feel like we have to choose. You're either Western Province, or you Northern Transvaal, or you All Black, or you South African Springbok, or you know what I mean. We always have to make these choices, and for some reason we choose sides. You're either one or the other. And the one thing I took out of this year, and speaking to everybody, but also from yourself, that I took out of from what you said, is that you don't have to choose. That's a nice thing. You can have a stone in each hand, and you can make the most with each stone that you've got, and you can treasure both of them. And I think Mark said it as well. We still South Africans, or wherever you come from, all over the world. We've never changed, and we won't ever change. But we've also embraced a new culture, and we're enjoying it. And and there's nothing wrong with that. And we've got a very, very fortunate position that we can enjoy both. We can have a stone in both hands. Isn't that a very privileged position that we're in?
Yeah, it is. It is. The podcast has also given me so many things to think about. I think I mentioned it before. You immigrate, and you just put one foot in front of the other, and you go forward and you go forward. You never look back, and you don't allow yourself really to look back. Mm-hmm. And I think the podcast has given me an ability to look back and say, okay, how far have we come, and what does other people have to say, and is there similarities? And I think as a human being, generally, we want to be helpful, and here's a brilliant opportunity to be helpful. And Ben, you say I do all the work, and it might be true in the sense of the physical work and doing all and getting everything ready and whatever else we have to do, but it takes two. It always does. Your contribution is equal to mine, in the sense that if you're one person, you get one idea and thought, and if you're two people, there's two different perspectives, and you hear it in every podcast, is that we are not the same people. We ask different questions, and you're the partner in here, and I recognize that, and I think that it's not a single idea. It's not a single person doing this. You've got to be two, and if you're two, I think the thing that we got right is that, and it's a mate of mine that said that to me, and I might have told it to you in the beginning, that it's really good to be two people on a podcast, but it could be really bad too, because you could kind of almost ambush people when they come onto the podcast, right? Because they feel overwhelmed, and I think that's the one thing that you've done personally really smartly, is not to, is for us and for you not, and for me not to be overwhelming to people, is to allow space, but also look at different perspectives. But I think also maybe, Ben, at this juncture, we also made a significant partnership this year. So we became a partner of Southern Crossings, who's based in Sydney. And Southern Crossings' motto, that's a networking group in Sydney, and their motto is South Africans Advancing Australia. And so for us, it was a significant thing to become a partner of them, in the sense that it's a like-minded thing. I think that it's a very positive thing. South Africans Advancing Australia is such a positive sentence, and so because it's not South Africans in Australia or South Africans advancing South Africans or something like that, right? And so it's a very positive thing, and we resonate with that. And we found some really good people there. A lot of not all. We have interviewed people outside of Australia, that, as you heard, from America as well, with Tanya and so on. And I think it's a broader thing. And for us, right, if you immigrate, it doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter what country you immigrate to. What we find more and more is that the story, there's some linkages in those stories, right?
It's probably a good segue, thinking about next year a bit, I think reflecting on the year, and we had a chat about it, what do we do? But I think based on the feedback we've got, we're going to keep on going. We're going to try and see if we can do this even better. We want to include more people from.
So are you saying that the networkers bought season 2?
I think so. I think that's
okay.
that's happened, signed off. It's just been an executive decision made by us.
Yes.
But no, I think we don't want to be locked into a geography or a country or a state, or certainly neither by gender. We want to talk to everybody. We really want to talk to younger people, older people, generational as well, first generation, second generations, people that came for their grandkids or people that are grandkids. We want to talk to all of them and get a different perspective next year of how people experience it. I still want to get a few younger people on who's just came here and hear from them how they experienced it, people who lost their school friends and those kind of things. So I think we've still got a lot of stories that we want to hear. And based on that, it'll be good to continue next year. And as you said, and through that journey, if we help a few people, then that's our only objective with the pod. And we're thankful for guys like Hein and Southern Crossings who supported us, and we want to throw it open to everybody, whether you come from South Africa to Australia. It just happened because that's what we know, that's been most of our guests, but certainly it's not restricted to just South Africans. It can be any other nationality coming here, and that's something we look at next year as well. And we can, we've already spoken to a few people who's gone to America. I mean, that's been interesting to me in itself, that, that people from America started reaching out to us, saying that, gee, we've listened to your pod, and you know what, I came to America, but I can absolutely associate to all your guests and what they're going through. I've experienced a similar thing, yes. So, there's so many other stories and avenues that we still want to pursue. So, really looking forward to next year, see what we can do.
Well, and you're right, Ben, there's an interesting thing that I learned when I came to Australia. I might have mentioned that I thought that I joined the Thought Leader Business School, and that was just to help me, take my intellectual property and commercialize it in some way. So, and the one thing that they said is that when you go and do these things, you're out of a corporate, and now you're on your own and you do these things, then they have a motto that says, do the work you love with the people you like, the way you want, which is exactly what we're doing, right? We do the work we love with the people that we like, or we do the work we like with the people we love the way we want. And so I think that's the thing about the podcast. If it is, for us, it's never been a commercial venture. It was more a commercial venture, rather. It was more an issue of we can do something useful, and I think that something useful is starting to show people enjoying it. And then, as you say, when the episodes become successful and people say they like it, and why haven't you been around, and we love what we hear and we can't wait for the next one, then we say, well, we can do more, and that's exactly what we're going to do next year, right?
Yeah, no, I don't think, we've always said we don't want to be defined by numbers, and it's not how many clicks and likes, it's about quality of content and meaningfulness, making it meaningful. I'd rather have our pod being watched by 10 people who's it really meaningful than a million who doesn't really care.
That's true.
It's just another pod.
But I'm allowed to use one statistic, right? Seeing that you talked about other countries. So the one statistic that I want to show that bears out to you saying, well, we need to talk to a diverse group of people is how many countries have accessed this podcast? And the answer to that is 11. So
Wow.
there's 11 countries or people in countries that have accessed this podcast. So and I think so that makes it truly global, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, surprising, but it's a good stat.
Yeah. Well, Ben, thank you very much for your time, contribution, your support, everything for this year. I mean, it's at times, you can't set diaries months and months ahead in advance, and so we had to work around a lot of issues with other people as well, and so on. And it's never easy, but I think the consistency has been great. We've launched 18 episodes, 19 really. We're going to launch this year. Since March, it means that our target was always to do 2 a month, and I think we've achieved that greatly. And so that's great. And that's only to the testimony of you arriving, being prepared, me arriving, being prepared, and having great guests who are prepared to come onto the podcast and share their stories. And so I'm looking forward to more of that next year.
No, thank you very much. Same from me. I mean, it's partnership. That's what it's all about. And for me, I said to you in the beginning, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this, just to grow myself. I wanted to do something different. I've been in operations and manufacturing and management all my life, and this is totally foreign to me. This is not really my comfort zone. I can say that honestly, but I've really, really immensely enjoyed it, and I wanted to stretch myself as I'm getting a bit older and just do something totally left field. But the learning from our guests, but also from yourself. And I mean, we have a lot of discussions and debates behind the scene, and that's how we get better. And sometimes, like in all businesses, we have to have rigorous debate to get to where we want to be, but we always get to a good ending. And that's what I really appreciate, and we still got the freedom to be honest and debate things with each other. Probably that's one of the good traits that we get from our South African nature, that we allow each other to say each other say without taking it too personal, and always knowing that it's said in with the intent that we bring the best out of each other. So, thanks for the patience. I know I've tested you a few times during the year, but the fact that you're still willing to go another round, it must be all right.
Yeah, Ben. No, all good. No, thank you. And, this is kind of it is our last episode for the year. And, I hope to see everybody that listens to that on the other side of 31st of December 2025 for a great 2026, and wishing you all of that.
Yeah, all the best. And as a final departure, just yes, our thoughts are with everybody and all our friends here in Australia that's been affected by the Bondi event as well. We do think of you guys over the festive period, and all the best there.